guest, so thank you all for staying. My name is Judith, and this is my colleague Christoph. We will present you today our paper, which is titled Requirements and Framework for Gaia-x-based Building Permit Processes. We wrote this paper alongside with a few other co-authors who could not be here today, but they also belong to the AICO project, where you see the logo in the corner. This project is funded by the German Ministry of Economic and Climate Affairs, and it should be the aim, the overall aim of this project is to relate the Gaia-x European project, you will hear much more about Gaia-x later from Christoph, to the construction industry, using some use cases, and one of the use cases is the building permit process. So first of all, some background and problem statement information. So as we all know, the issuing a building permit is a key process for a successful building project for sure. So every building has to pass it, but it's very, very complex thing to different stakeholders and numerous regulation, fragmented information flows, and so on. And if you want to relate it to the Gaia-x, we have to consider what are we actually dealing with, also especially considering services and data. And then we did a self-executed survey, and at this point it has like 200 responses from municipalities in Germany. So they are already using some specialized software, which is more like public administration software, like almost 90%. But they are also using, within Germany, like over 20 different software solutions. So, and also one respondent said that they would need 3 years to rearrange or re-implement another software. So it's quite an issue. So we cannot change it directly if we want to propose a new software application or something. So we should deal with what we have. And also, this is also very related to Gaia-x, for sure. So there are almost 90% of them consider trustworthy data storage and data that's relevant for is important or very important. So for our methodology, we're quite simple. So we did in step 1 requirement specification, where we go on next. Then we had a framework, which is also the paper about, which will Christoph then explain, and then we have a case study. And for the requirement specification, we are considering different types or different domains. So one is the process modeling side for building permits. Then we have the digital building permit domain, let's say. So what do we need for digital building permitting, like data, what data, the software, but also the regulations and standards already exist. And last but not least, we have also the Gaia-x context we need to consider. And this is all something new in this approach, how to do it. For the process requirements, I can go through it quite simple. So you see a very, very simplified process model of the building permit process. This is also just from the pre-consultation to the insurance. There are also some pre-processes and post-processes, and we also just subdivide into the authority sides, which depends on, or which is, it consists of a lot of stakeholders. The same is true for the applicant side, but we also modeled here a database layer, let's say. But maybe more interesting, it's also these the digital building permit requirements. Here, the domain I mentioned before, data, software, regulations, and standards. So I can give you some examples. For the data, for example, we have for sure like the building application data, which is in the building application. We have maybe also BIM data, GIS data, or ALKIS, which is quite familiar in Germany, which is related to Kataster and things like that. But in the software, as I mentioned before, in the survey, we have this public administration software, but also some software for also the platform for the submission, platform for collaboration. We may have in future model checker and other software applications, but also we need to consider the regulations and standards like X-Bau and X-Planung in Germany, but also the building codes and other bylaws, or maybe also even some ISO and DIN standards. So, and now I give the stage to Christoph.
Thanks a lot. That's perfect, actually, because Judith represents also in the project, and we tried that out in the live project, the building, the civil engineering side, and I represent the IT engineering. You don't want to know when everything works, of course. So, and the key question was, does it work? And would Gaia-X, the pan-European answer to hyperscalers, would that work? And the first thing is, we boiled down Gaia-X, not just in the requirements, but also what would it be? If you characterize it technically, there are 3 things you need to memorize what Gaia-X is about. And the first 2 is its technical standards. As a civil engineer, you know standards, but you can forget them. Organizational standards, that's much more important actually, because it says, how do participants, we have 20 or so participants in the building permit process alone, in the whole construction business, I don't know, 60, 80, look at the co-authors of the paper. So how do they get identity? That's an organizational process, and then you have the wallet and the idea. So that's number 2. And number 3, and there is a lot of wrong rumors about that, brought about by IDSA and other players. Gaia-X is no data space. It's a service space. Of course we can exchange data. Everything can be done using a service abstraction. But if you just start with data, it's too little and too less. Judith mentioned model checker. Model checker you cannot model really good in form of data exchange. Many things are good in the data space, but not everything. So a service mesh is much better. You can read the rest of the characterizations for yourself. That's unofficial. I've been working with Gaia-X for 3 years, but we never got around to kind of really officially accepting that. But if anyone has a critique on that, please let me know. I'm happy to iterate that to learn something, but it has survived 3 years. The next thing is, how do you analyze everything? We have requirements that's asking the questions, how do we put also technically everything together? And you will easily recognize the categories Judith has mentioned. There is only one highlight, and that, sorry, it's too far away, and that relates to software. With software, actually it should have been called services, but many especially public authorities still think in software and not services. So you have software which out of itself is already a service, is Gaia-X compliant, and then you have everything else. And you have to treat that a little bit different. The second most important thing is, and that's also the color code, red means, in my slide, every participant in such a service, digital permit ecosystem, every participant has to provide a self-description, which kind of is obvious. If you want to expose services, if you want to participate, you have to describe the services. No one else would know what they mean, and you would also have to describe yourself. Otherwise, I come from Vienna, my software AG headquarters in Darmstadt. I mean, at email, I can masquerade as software AG, but not, if you hear me speaking, everyone would immediately recognize that I'm not from Darmstadt. But you have to have identity. What you also need a little bit in ecosystems is ecosystem support functions like a catalog, like someone who is providing the identity, and someone who is certifying. Wallets. You have a wallet here for your, for your boarding pass. Who is verifying those wallets? And that's a federator or a Gaia-X digital hub. Will that be in the future? And finally, unfortunately, the participants also will have to do a little bit in order to become Gaia-X compliant, and that basically relates to translating Gaia-X identity standards to the internal identity and access management standards. That is number 1. And number 2 is a happy message, also often confused. you don't need any connector. That's data space. Data space is the IDSA folks. They need a connector, not Gaia-X. Sometimes, however, it's good to put everything Gaia-X related into such a component, like a eierlegende Wollmilchsau, you know, a very big component, and everything which is not in your bespoke software goes into that component. So in some senses, it's good to talk about a connector, to have that in the architecture, but it's not really necessary. So that's the process automation framework. We tried to do that in reality. And reality, not bytes, is more complex than a framework, you know that. This is the Archimate modeled, actually, structure, the architectural diagram, just for 2 participants in the digital building permit process, and we have 7 or 8 typically. But you still see the process lanes modeled rigorously. You see the data in the middle. And please note, and it's very careful, you have a data plane in the middle, but you remember Gaia-X wants to create self-sovereign data sharing. You all know, of course, what self-sovereignty in data sharing means. I just repeat it for you. It means that the individual participants, in that case, the provider of GIS data, that the individual participants have the last word whether they want to share the data or not. So even if you have data in the data space in the middle, in the data space lane, it's just a name, the individual participant have the last word. They have an agent which controls whether you give away your data or not. That's sovereignty. Then, of course, you have also some services for the data space, and very important, transgressing data spaces. You also have place a lane for services like model checker, which need a self-description. What did we learn and what is still to be done? The first one is, that's too far away here, then the clicker doesn't work. So the first one is, if you separate, you remember Judith, she claimed that it's good that you can separate out data and Gaia-X in the requirements process and also in the architecture as separate entities. We can confirm that. That really works. I mean, I'm the living proof, and we get along quite well, even after 1.5 years in the project, and there is time to see that. The second one is that data sharing, you remember the last slide, data sharing takes place between one process and the other. So that's the vertical lines, the choreography line, if you want. And that's difficult, and you need to model the processes very thoroughly, and then you get to your data sharing pipes, and then you see where Gaia-X and data spaces create an economic benefit. But if you don't do that, you do not know how much data, where data is really going to be shared. And the final thing for us to do in the last 1.5 years actually is to demonstrate how that would work in practice. There is a little bit of software already here, Gaia-X Federation Services. We are doing that iteratively with the demonstrator. So hopefully in 1 year we can tell you how that really worked out in practice and how easy or how hard it really was. Data, Gaia-X, and the digital building permit process. Of course, it's not limited to digital building permit processes. Thanks a lot for your attention.